Okay, so we are on page Chavtes. Um, just about 6-7 lines from the top. The line begins with Behechrech Leimer. All right. So we have a whole preparation to this moment. Ultimately, this is the direction that everything at its core is the Oynig. The Oynig is what gives it a presence and what gives it sustenance and what gives it chayis. This is the ikor of everything. This Oynig is not an individual Oynig that is created within the particular koyach, particular activity. This is an Oynig that is drawn from the nefesh, from the chayes nefesh. It is entirely correct to say that even though there is a particular Oynig in a particular action, and it's very definitive to that action, where is the Oynig actually taking place? It's in the nefesh. The nefesh is misalik. Even though the Oynig is so far removed from the nefesh per se, from the essence of the nefesh. But this is where the Oynig is coming from. It's drawn from the nefesh and then defined according to this particular koyach, where it is imbued and where it is experienced. This transition from nefesh into the koyach represents some kind of, it's meant to say hagbola, of an effect of defining and limiting the Oynig. That the Oynig should be able to focus on that particular koyach. That is a tremendous hagbola, because the nefesh per se is mufshat, is unlimited, and it does not have a particular relationship, so to speak, with a specific activity, a specific Oynig. And yet, this is the source of the Oynig. And as we say again, when the Oynig is imbued in a particular koyach, it is literally the Oynig of that koyach. It is not something devoid, something above, unrelated, unappreciative of this particular koyach. Let me elaborate on this slightly, because the more we understand this clearly, we will understand the significance of what follows. We always have this illustration of a home. We spoke many times, a home is an extremely significant reality in a person. In the home, there is furnishings. The furnishings versus the home is what we can call shaloi be'erech. There is no comparison on the significance of the home to the person versus the significance of the furnishings. Yet, as we point out all the time, the furnishings, they have an element, an aspect of the significance of the home. but it is much reduced. But they have an aspect of the significance home. It's not that the home is remote. This is the overall thing, and the furnishings are insignificant, are just functional. It's not true. The furnishings are not just functional. The furnishings are part of the home. But the whole element, the home element that is recognized and experienced in the furnishings is shaloi be'erech. This is what's called the hagbola, a reduced and a minute element drawn from the overall significance of the home. This is the similar inyan. The koichos and the nefesh have a direct connect. They are representative of nefesh, but in a much reduced level than the nefesh itself. To drive the point home, if God forbid there is a situation where a person is not able to use any one of his koichas, he can still live. Not only can he live, but he can actually experience life, and sometimes to the fullest. Even though he's to the fullest. In other words, even though he's handicapped, nevertheless, he can persist life and experience life and thrive in life.
Talking about the person with the presence of mind, or with presence of mind, or no presence of mind?
No, presence of mind.
Yes.
So even though he is missing a certain function, a certain activity, he can still live and thrive in life. But you cannot live without life, without the nefesh. That is the real thing. In other words, the real thing is shaloi be'erech to that which is derived from it. And yet, that which is derived from it has an element of that. It is real living. It is not just a functional for the purpose of accomplishing something. It has a real experience, as we discussed at great length last week. Okay, now we continue. Therefore, we are forced to say, observing this phenomenon, we have to say that this phenomenon, that tainug is nimshach into the koiches, hu alidei memutza. It comes alidei memutza via an intermediary. Some kind of intervening step. What should this memutza represent? Okay. Ha-koilel kula. The memutza is that stage, that phenomenon, that koyach, or that element in the person, ha-koilel kulam, that includes and contains all of them, all the various koyachs. Which means, sheboy mislab es hatainu bichlal. That in this memutza, the tainug is mislabes, is imbued bichlal, overall, including everything. V'al yodoi, and then via this memutza, bo b'chol hakoiches b'prat. The tainug comes into in all the koiches on an individual basis. Okay, so we have a terminology. What is, again, let's just repeat in our own words. There has to be a mamutza. What is the mamutza? The mamutza includes the whole toin ha'oineg bichlal. Bichlal means including everything. Then from this mamutza can be drawn oineg into the individual koyach. Individual. Now, what is the difference between this memutza that includes all the koyches, pardon bichlal, yes, all the oineg and all the koyches bichlal, and that makes it possible for the oineg to be nimshach biprat to every koyach. How is this bichlal different than the oineg as it is in the nefesh itself? The nefesh also has the oineg bichlal.
I missed that question. What is the question?
What is this memutza provide that is not there in the nefesh?
What does it have to?
What?
It says the hefer, it's imperative. What is it?
Because the nefesh is shaloi be out of the koyches. That's what he explained.
The Ayin is the mamutza, or the mamutza is between the Ayin and the koyches?
The memutza is between the nefesh and the koyches.
Between the nefesh and the koyches. And in the mostly give about the home just now. The home itself, the chlal, is the nefesh.
No. One second. The mashal of the home I gave in order we should understand how in every individual part in the home there's an aspect of the home. That's end of story. We can talk in terms of nefesh, and it's true, but that's not what we are looking for. Just to explain, on the contrary, that in every detail is nimshach, an element of the whole.
Which is higher, the kochos or the nefesh itself?
The nefesh.
The nefesh is higher.
Of course. Nefesh is there. All right. Am I reading correctly that we are totally not into it here?
There are pieces missing.
We don't know what you're talking about?
Doesn't seem so confusing. There's Nesham, the Nefesh, and
Thank you,
the
Shlomo
koyches.
Jensen. You saved the day.
Unless I'm messing what's going on, but we're saying there needs to be some intermediary. I don't know.
It's safe to say for those of us on the phone also.
What? What did you say?
It's safe to say for those of us who are on the phone also.
Yeah.
Well, that's the question.
All right. So I want to. Right. Let's go and bring it all back. I mean, there's absolutely no point of going without. I said the locomotive cannot go without if the caboose is detached. Certainly, if all the cars are detached.
The tining, the whole Indian of tining is a little bit elusive for me at least.
Well, the thing is like this. We emphasize a lot about the oineg, and we have to remember those points. Otherwise, it can always be elusive. Oineg is not something that you can grasp. That's exactly the point of oineg. Oineg is above koyches. And it's always going to be elusive if you're trying to grasp it. This is what we spoke yesterday, my friend. It doesn't belong in the kosher. It doesn't belong in you. It belongs, but through Oynek you belong to the bigger reality.
Is this correct? Is this correct? That since we established that the Mamutza has everything within it, we're trying to establish how the Mamutza is different from the Oynek itself, in the Etzel Oynek. Is that correct? That's what we're trying to understand now.
That's right. How is it different if the Oynek Beis is in the Mamutza the way it
Since
is in
anyway
the
has everything within it.
But let's
What is it that we have to have in mind to focus on Tammuz? That we shouldn't forget?
that Tainug does not come through a process. The same Tainug that you have in the hand, that is the Tainug that you have in the nefesh.
This is the point. The whole idea that it's the timing of the nefesh, or this that you keep repeating. I'm not relating to this. I don't understand it. What does it mean that it's the same timing no matter where it's?
All right. So let's take the mashal of the home. Are the furnishings in the home?
Yeah.
Are they the same thing as the home?
No.
In what way are they in the home?
In what way are they?
In what way are they related to the home and they're separate?
They're complementing the home. They're in the home. They're expressing the inyan of the home.
You said they have a reduced significance.
The question over here is not what they are giving you functionally. In what way are they related to the home directly? The human being needs a home and needs a furniture. They're two different requirements. He needs a roof over his head. He needs a chair to sit on. They're two completely separate different requirements.
They make the home worth living in.
Well, if you have a home without furniture and it's thundering and pouring outside, you'll come into the home even if it has no furniture.
That's true.
That's the similar thing that we lose sight of in Oynek is the same thing. We have to understand what we are referring to when we say a home or we say Oynek.
I don't know the answer to that question.
I understand. I hear. They know the answer to your question. I think so. Let's go into that. It's much more vivid. It's much more tangible, and hopefully we can get a sense of that. This is something which is a recurring topic by us, that Odom Shein advice in Yom. Do we understand that? Can we relate to that statement? It's a Nigla statement. It's not a
It gives him a place in the world. It puts him as a real presence in the world to have a home. This is
right.
It's a keli for his essence. To be.
Oh, that's more important. The home does not make him; he makes the home, because he is a real presence. This is important to understand. It isn't that he has a home, so therefore he has a place in the world. No. The cat also has a place in the world because it has its home, a hobby. The cat is a cat whether he has a home or not. A human being is not a human being who doesn't have a home. Odom Shina Beis Ein Yodom. That's what's in the Gemara. I don't mind spending as much time as necessary because we have to get this is really looking for a principle. What?
How do you connect or relate Oneg with home?
No, forget about it. Forget it. We'll come back to it.
You said that the person gives significance to the home. So then how do you say that a person is not a person without a home? That the whole purpose of the whole meaning of the home depends on the person.
All right. What is the meaning of Odom Shina Beis Ein Yodom? We are going back all the way to the beginning. And we have to get a sense of this. This is a neshama thing. This is human intelligence. This is not scientific intelligence. Please, this is the real thing. The Rebbe created the world. Do we understand that the world is a creation? The world didn't create itself. Do we sense that? God created the world, and He gave it a godly significance. And from that perspective, when God created the world, the first 5.5 days, it was a world with everything in it, totally furnished, so to speak. Everything was functioning, except there was no human being. Now we have to ask ourselves a question. What was the significance of the world at that moment? Thank you, Shmuel. I tell you, Shmuel, you must come every day. Not because you're going to add, because for you, it'll bring you life. Your questions come up sometimes from the left field and I flip over. But you are capable of understanding this is your lifeline. Okay, so we discussed this many times. That the world before the human being came was nothing. With all its great designs, it's nothing to it. No significance. Take a step out of this for a moment. We speak all the time, there are many human inventions that the human being has built to represent the human quest to conquer the world, essentially, which is part of his mission in life, the godly mission, to humanize the world, right? That's what we also spoke all the time. So if a person has a car, and all it's able to do is go in circles and chase its own tail. Is this a car? Does it have any significance? It doesn't go anyplace. You know I'm not willing to. There has to be some real accomplishment. What is the world without a human being? Chasing its own tail. When the human being came to the world, that changed his entire perspective. There's a real presence there. In what way is it a real presence? The human being created the link between the world and its creator. And now the whole world came to life. It has a real significance. It represents reality itself. This is what happens when human being came. So now, do I have with me? Okay. If we understand that, what is the difference between I'm jumping maybe, try to come on. The relationship between the human being in the world and the everything else in the world, with the world. The cat in the world and the human being in the world. How do we try and define the difference in this relationship? Nobody is volunteering, but I'm going to say it, but I want to know that you understand it, that you relate to it. The cat is a participant. The cat is there. He needs food, so he has food. He needs shelter, so he has where to crawl in. The human being is a builder. He owns it. He makes the world into a world.
Is it correct to say he's a giver, not a taker?
He is a giver, not a taker. He brings godliness into the world. He actually builds it. He gives it his significance. He owns it, rather than being a guest there. Sometimes an unwanted guest, uninvited guest. He owns it. That's what the world is all about. He makes the world into a world. When does this principal reality of the human being's relationship to the world come to a full expression, to full realization? When he has a home, when he has a part of the world. If he owns it, and he doesn't have a place to be, he doesn't own it. He hasn't yet established his presence. Odom shein lebayis shein Odom, because Odom means that he owns a piece of the world. That's what it means. That's what he is supposed to be. I explained many times it doesn't mean you have to own it. You have a place where renting is the same thing. A place where you belong. You mentioned many times there was this man, Howard Hughes. You probably know that, right?
Sure.
Of course. So Howard Hughes was an immensely wealthy man. I mean, he owned the world, really. He was the wealthiest man in the world. He never lived a full day of life in the world. He never lived as a human being. He never experienced life in the world as a human being. He never slept 2 nights in a row in the same bed. He was constantly chased, constantly scared for his own disease. He didn't live in his own home. He lived in hotels. You can afford all of our stories, all one of our stories in the world. He can sample. And he wasn't for real. A little Menschele who has a little hut at the end of the town, and this is his place, is infinitely richer than this Howard Hughes who had billions of dollars. His life is real. He represents a human being in the world.
So even halachically, Kel Gomer Alai, that even if he doesn't make the mistake determines the age of the B'Sivli.
I can.
And the pasuk Kel Gomer Alai,
Kel Gomer Alai, yeah.
that the bezin is koveya, the mitzias, even
That's
if they
right.
make a mistake.
Yeah, okay,
The physical
yeah.
mitzias.
Okay.
Why do we say when someone owns something that he's a giver?
because this concept of ownership, we explained many times, ownership in the true sense of the word, the way Torah defines it, is not a convention, and agreed upon amongst human beings. It's a godly reality. Therefore, he's bringing godliness into the world. This is why he's saying he's a contributor. This is what the human being did, that we said. He created the link. What did Adam Rishon do the first thing when he opened his eyes? The Gemara says right then on Friday when he first was created. He opened up his eyes, he saw the whole world, he says, hey guys, let's go, let's praise Hashem.
What?
Let's praise Hashem. Otherwise, you don't have, if you don't have the Creator, you have nothing. This is Adam. This is the human being. Okay. So now, in this home, which represents the reality of the human being, there are all kinds of functional elements, like we said, furnishings and so forth. These furnishings are also representative of the human being. Let's elaborate on this. Just as a human being has to have a place where he belongs, that is part of what defines a human being. He also has to have the means by which he can act like a human being. He does not lie on the floor, he sits in a chair. He does not eat from the floor, he eats from a plate. He does not eat with his face into the food, he brings the food into his mouth. This is all part of human respect, of the human dignity. This is part of the statement that the human being is a melech in the world. He cannot fall into the world. I have to eat. Oh, crawl on the floor and eat. The food has to come to me. If I have to crawl for the food, then I'm abdicating my position as a human being. Therefore, all the furnishings, all the functional elements in the home have the same element as the home itself. This is his place, and these are the things that he uses. So, we're together on this?
Yeah.
Now, these things that he uses, they're all representative of the same principle, that his presence in the world is real. Like I said, if he has to crawl and eat from the floor, what is he giving up? He's giving up his position in the world, his contribution to the world. He's acting like an animal instead of like a human being. It's basically the same principle.
I don't see how you get all that from this.
Because you didn't listen, Shmuel. I said, when a person crawls on the floor to eat, he is not acting like a melech. A melech, the food has to come to him. Right? He has to retain his dignity. One of the huh?
He's not acting like a human being.
Like, what's a human being?
Every human being is a melech.
Yeah, the human being has a shlichus in the world. His little chelke ba'olam, as the Rebbe says.
What's the lashon? What ba'om?
Huh?
What was the lashon there?
Chelke ba'olam.
Shlichus means melech.
a shlichus from the Melech means what?
How does it?
Evet Melech, Melech.
What?
The Beis Ha'evet, how does that?
The same thing. He represents the Melech.
So,
Huh?
so although all the furnishings and all the things are they represent this inyan of being a melech, which is the same inyan that the home represents, but the furnishings represent them on a much more defined level.
Exactly. A much more reduced level. Even though it's the same principle. The principle is that he has a real place in the world. It's the same principle, but it's a much more reduced level. Let's pursue this, okay? Even though we are completely out of the text. But let's pursue this. When we think of the furnishings, will you come up with the need of the furnishings because you see a home? Where is that concept of furnishings or utensils come up? From the home? From the owner of the home. The owner of the home has two distinct levels. He is a human being, and he has a mouth, and he has hands, and he has eyes, and he has feet. All of these things are part of the human being, but these are all subsets, so to speak. All these functional elements. So these furnishings are derivatives from the human being of certain aspects of the human being. But not, these aspects are all interconnected. The human being has them all. In order to be a human being in the full sense of the word, in a functioning, active manner, he has to have, with neighborhood help, 2 hands, 2 feet, a mouth, a nose, eyes, ears, and everything else. And the brain. Even the brain has to have. All right. So therefore, think about this. There is an initial element that the Odom Shene Beis Shene Odom. That element really includes everything, but it doesn't. It's a much higher level than including any details. It's the essential element. The transition from that Nekuda into the actual furnishing has to have an intermediate state. Intermediate state. What is the intermediate state? The intermediate state is that which recognizes the overall reality of the human being. At what level? At a level that disseminates it. That makes it functional. What function? Everything. Every function. The whole human being, the whole spectrum of human activity.
What is that?
This is called the Memutza.
What is that in the Mashal?
That's the human capacity for seichel and midas, and speech and thought and action and everything else. So, right? How you capture the world? First, you have to be in the world. That's the bias, and then you have to make your presence known by building it up.
That's the furnishings.
That's the furnishings.
But what's the mamutza between the being in the world and the functioning?
I explained. You said yourself. The various koiches that a person has, the various functions that a person has. All of these functions are part of his human presence in the world. Yes or no? You don't seem to be shaking your head full-heartedly. Okay, let's not jump. Let me put in what's missing. When the person eats, and how the cat eats, is it a similar activity or different?
It's different.
What's the difference?
He is.
A cat eats to survive. Mashenke, and a person, he's being invited in the tutsis. He's creating the reality that food is a holy thing.
Right. He eats. If you take it in simple terms, the tutsis is a little bit high for me. In a simple term, he eats so that he can function. And he can go on and humanize the world. The cat eats to survive.
Also to function.
No, not to function, to survive, to be. This is the story that we mentioned. It seems like a simplistic, almost a truistic story, right? The story with the Maharash. Everyone knows the story of the Maharash?
Yeah, the Goy and the Goyish slave and the Jewish slave.
You can slave, no? He was a Goyish servant in the house, and there was a Yid. You know the story. Rebbe Maharash had two sons. He had three sons, but the two sons, so the Hazor and the Rebbe and their Maharashab were two children, and they were debating between themselves, what's the difference between a Yid and a Havdul Goy? The Rebbe Rashab and the Hazor, at whatever age it is, there's something to listen to. And the Maharaj, their father, overheard their discussion. So he called them in, and then he gave them a simple demonstration what the difference is. And I want you should understand the significance of that, although it's very simple. So he told the Rashab, who was the younger of the two brothers, to go and call a Jewish servant in the house. Ayid who were on the Shamash.
First he called not Jew.
Yeah, he said the point called not Jew. Anyway, he called one of them. He called the Eid, and so the Rebbe came. The Rebbe asked him, "Did you eat today?" So he said, "Yes." "Did you eat well?" He says, "I was meant well. Baruch Hashem, I'm not hungry." "Why did you eat?" "So I could live." "Why do you need to live?" "So that I can say capital Tinim, I can daven, I can whatever a Yid has to do. So okay, you can go. Now you told him to go and call the Goy. Called the Goy, whatever, there was a wagon driver in the house, he called him in. "No, Ivan, did you eat today?" "Yeah." "Did you eat well?" "Oh, yeah." "Why did you eat?" "So I can live." "Why need to live?" "So I can have a shot mishke. I can have a shot. I drink brown food." So this seems like a very simplistic story. It's an extremely significant story. What's the significance of the story? That there is two types of eating. Eating in order to continue to eat, to be able to eat more. Now it's all contained within the same framework of a physical experience. Whether it's eating or drinking mashke, it's all within the same framework, the moral framework. Or eating in order to live, and life is something completely outside of the world. Nothing to do with the world. It's life itself. Say capital Tinim, it has nothing to do with the world. That's the human being.
So only from Yidden are human beings? So the from Yidden who have been to Yeshiva and learned how to say Tehillah, they're the only human beings.
There are other human beings who also have in mind to do other good things, but if their mind is to eat so that for supper I can go to a better restaurant, yes, this is not a human standard. People go around testing the various restaurants around town. I don't know if that's a human activity.
So,
all right, Shmuel. Shmuel.
Being human is a very artificial thing. You have to be, without it wouldn't come natural. It wouldn't come, without training.
It's not true. It's not true. Just the opposite. It's not true. I want you to understand this is not true. The other day I had a whole discussion in the house, discussion about being what is it called? That what we are exposed to, we get used to.
Secular.
Huh?
Secular view. Secular.
Yeah, but what?
Conditioning.
Conditioning. Right. The other was the word conditioning. So people are saying that we are conditioned to live like human beings. The opposite is true. To think like human beings, this is what we are. We are being conditioned to think like monkeys. That's a conditioning. It's not true. And a human being who doesn't have a human activity, he feels very uncomfortable. What's going on? He can face himself.
How does this go back to the Mamutza?
To the what?
The Mamutza.
Okay, so here is the Mamutza. You're saying there is the home, which is a principal element in the human presence in the world. Then there is his activities, okay, in the world. And the Mamutza is that state where he is aware that even when you eat, you also have to be a human being. Even though it doesn't represent the principle of Adam AyinBase, but you still have to eat like a human being. And Oicha Basuk, they want to kill it.
So it's a concept. The Mamutza is he's applying this general principle, and he's projecting what a human being would be in an environment of...
That's right. The Mamutza is that which takes a human being, the essence of being, and it contains all human activities. Whereas at the moment when you say AyinBase doesn't have human activity, it has just the core principle.
It sounds like Chokhmah.
Okay, we're not looking for a solution. We're looking for the need, for the identification of the need.
Okay.
So this is what we say, that there is the Oinagan Nefesh. Oinagan Nefesh, okay, now we have this whole thing laid out. Oinagan Nefesh, this is the essence of the Nefesh. This is literally a godly presence. Only God can provide a Nefesh. This is completely above of anything. From that has to be drawn an element that gives chayus into specific activities. The hand to move and the mouth to speak. And it has to be...
What was the latter part of what you just said? And to what?
The hand to move and the mouth to speak. There has to be a nefesh element in that. When we speak, we don't speak like robots. And when we move, we don't walk like robots. We experience that activity. There is an element of nefesh, an element of chayas, an element of oinagin. And this element of oineg that's contained in these koiches is the nefesh itself. It all comes from the same nefesh. It's not a separate thing that was given to these koiches. Just as in our moshel of the home and the person's functions in the home. And therefore, there has to be a memutza. What is the memutza? What does the memutza represent? The memutza represents all the various oineg aspects, and he includes all the various oineg aspects. The way it is in the nefesh, there is no oineg aspects. There's only one perfect reality of oineg. In order that that should be translated in specific activities, koiches, and it has to be drawn from there, there has to be a stage what's called a memutza. And the memutza, the Rebbe says these words, and this is where we start. Behechrech leimer. Okay, we're reading the words that you started today again. Behechrech leimer. Therefore, it is imperative. We must conclude, and we have to say, based on the fact that we have individual koiches, each one has an oineg element, and it's all drawn from the same source, from the nefesh, from the oineg, not oineg hakloli. Oineg hakloli is not the correct word. Oineg ho'atzmi of nefesh, which doesn't have any definitive, any subdivision, any relations to particular koiches. From that oineg which is completely above and mufshet from all the koiches, should be drawn into the koiches. Therefore, there has to be sham shochas ha'tainug be'al koiches, that the tainug drawn into the koiches has to be hu alidei mamutza. It is through the services to the stage of mamutza. What is the mamutza? The mamutza is hakoil el kulom, who includes all the koiches. Sheboy mislab hakoil tainug bichlal. And in this mamutza, the tainug is mislabish bichlal. Overall, in general. Now, there's a big difference between bichlal and be'etzim. Be'etzim means there is no klal. There is essential truth. Bichlal means all-inclusive. Once you speak about all-inclusive, you are speaking about a level of a presence, not an essential level. That's all-inclusive. And then, via the services of this memutza, the oina comes in all the koiches biprat, specifically in individual. There is already a correlationship between the klal and the prat. There is a relationship between the etzem and the prat. There is no relationship. There's no way to find any kind of relationship between the klal and the prat. Yes. One second. If we should take this back, since we went to all that land, think back to our moshel of the home. This union of the home Odom shein lebayis ene Odom is not referring to a bias where he can have a table and chairs, right? As we explained. A bias means just a place. The fact that he has a place in the world, that is the definition. Conceptually, that place does not provide for furnishings. It's just a place that has a root, a nekuda. In terms of, say, Odom, there's no elaboration to it. The halacha is that every Yid owns a piece of Eretz Yisrael. That's why we can write out Prusbul and all that. What size? There's no size. Even if a person has a needle width in Eretz Yisrael, he owns a piece of land. A needle width.
Needle width.
Once it goes into a home, then the home provides for all kinds of different developments. It includes everything. Then you can define, from that everything you can say, okay, in this room I need this, in this room I need this. But the first it has to be everything. In other words, when you speak, for example, if you would take a very simple illustration of the concept, you speak in terms of life itself. A person should live in the world. Say, pikuach nefesh doiches hakol. There's no limit to what is permitted, what's required to do in order to save a life. And when we talk about pikuach nefesh, clearly we do not measure the person on the basis of what he can accomplish. We speak in terms of life, and you know to what extent. We speak in terms of life, of a moment of life. A moment of life. Not even an expanse of life. One moment of life is an eternity. And God forbid if somebody shortens somebody's life who is on a gracious state by one moment, it's a mind-boggling offense. So from speaking at that level, you cannot speak in terms of functionality. In order to come from that essential element of life into functionality, and it is correlated. It is definitely correlated, because this is what you bring down into your functionality, like we said. When you eat, you have to eat in a certain way that is representative of who you are. When you speak, you have to speak in a way that's representative of who you are, and everything else. But it has to be an intermediate stage where you can say, okay, there is representation of that truth. It's not just the pure truth itself. There's a representation that this is the place where all the possibilities are included. This is a cloud. From this is drawn the prat. Okay.
So the klal is the mamutza.
The klal is the mamutza. Ve'al yodei bo b'chol ha'kochos b'prat. And then through the klal, it comes in all the kochos b'prat. That very same chayus, that very same oinek. The whole. And what is this klal? That includes and is the receptacle of Oyneg Bichlal, of all the Yonim of Oyneg, of all the Yonim of Oyneg, Hu Koyach HaChochma Shebenefesh. This is the Koyach HaChochma Shebenefesh. Always, this is the enormous clarity that we are getting here. We always say Chochma and Oyneg is the same thing. Pnimius Abba, Pnimius Atik. But there's a difference in that. Atik has everything and Chochma has everything. Chochma has everything. Atik is above everything and has everything by default. Or maybe more correctly, Atik is creates everything. What?
What does it mean he has it by default?
By default means by virtue of its supremacy, not by actual identity. You cannot identify with anything. The highest and everything, you can identify what his function is going to be. You can identify. In Chochmah, you can identify what you can do, what the functionality is.
This is all. This is.
Okay. They have to interrupt, but in order not to leave kind of in a halfway, hopefully we understand so far. Just want to make this point. Chochmah is the intermediate, as we are learning now, and it's going to be elaborated. The intermediate between the Oyneg Shabanefesh, with the Nefesh, and all the koiches. And all the koiches. Chochmah is, nevertheless, we say Chochmah Pnimis Abba Pnimis Ad. Chochmah is sensitive to the whole Oyneg. What is the difference between the way the Oyneg is in Oyneg and the way the Oyneg in a Nefesh or the way the Oyneg is Chochmah? If Chochmah is privy, it experiences, it sees the whole Oyneg. It sees the whole Oyneg. How is it different than the Oyneg itself? What's the difference? How come in Chochmah we say it's a cloud, which means it has protein, and in Oyneg there is no protein?
Stands from outside and sees from that which is inside.
That's right. And the Moshe in Chochmah, and this will I'll leave you. The Moshe in Chochmah is sight. Sight is a phenomenal thing. I always speak about sight. Why is it so phenomenal? Because it's actually approximating Chochmah. And what is the uniqueness of sight versus all other koyches? It is that in sight, in one instant, you observe the entire panorama. But when you observe the entire panorama, you're not observing that there is something. You observe everything that's in the panorama. In one instant. The whole cloud. When you are, so to speak, when you are in the panorama, that is not, there's no instant. And you're not in the details. You are just in that reality. When you go into a shul, okay, this will be easier to you go into the shul. In the shul there is an Aron Kodesh. There are tables, there are all kinds of different things, Sforim. When you go into a shul, when you step into the shul, you're in the shul. You're not in the Sforim, you're not in the Aron Kodesh, you're not with the tables and chairs, you're in the shul. When you open your eyes, then you see all of these things that we mentioned. Also at a glance. Also in one moment. But that moment is a different level than the moment of entering the shul. Entering the shul, you become part of the shul. Opening your eyes and observing, you are observing the shul. And that's the difference between Oyneg and Choch. And with this, we are going to take a break till tomorrow morning.
Wouldn't the Oyneg be you're in the shul and Chachma is you're looking from outside?
No, Chochma is it's also inside, but you look at it. That's an outside of it. You're observing. When you're observing, in order to observe, you have to be within, you have to be there. But you're inside and observing it as it appears to you. So that is already different than being there. That's why you say Chochma and Oyneg are very closely interrelated, because Chochma actually relates to the truth of the Oyneg itself. But it relates to it at the level where it relates to it. That's what I said. Oyneg doesn't relate. Oyneg is connected directly. Chochma has a relationship. That's why Chochma said beetle. The word beetle, where is beetle applicable? When there are two things. One is bottle to the other. In Oyneg we don't call it beetle. Normally we call it union.
Chochma is an aloof experience.
Huh?
It's an aloof experience.
That's right. All right. What do you got today? 2 lines?
A few notes.
Huh?
A few notes. Some video.